Good morning and welcome to The Usual Suspects. I'm Steve Van Coor. Now, I know how it is when you see a political talk show come on, any talk show, you're like, let me pick up the remote, let me see if this is something I'm interested in. Well, if you have money, if you use a bank, if you, God forbid, invested in cryptocurrency, this is the show you're going to want to watch, because we're going to break it down with Florida's former chief banking regulator, a securities lawyer who knows more about all these subjects than anybody I've ever met. And so he's up this week in Tallahassee because he was on the State Board of Education and he got termed out, so they did a nice little ceremony for him, and we're going to talk a little bit about that at the end to thank him for his service. But former state representative Tom Grady is with us today. Now we're going to break down some of the basics. Now, if you go to a news site, you pick up the local paper, all you see, or mostly what you see, is banking failures. They're collapsing around the country, and I wonder, will this happen to my bank? Now, I bank at Capital City Bank, so I don't think that's going to happen because they're very conservative and they're very well-heeled. So good for them. But a lot of banks took a lot of risks on high-tech companies, and a lot of those high-tech companies were involved in crypto. A lot of them invested in cryptocurrency, and now, as you saw with the spectacular collapse of FTX, now we're having more and more collateral collapses coming across the board. We're going to break that down with Tom Grady when we come back. We're going to go through what is cryptocurrency, how is this affecting banking, how will this maybe not affect you, and then ultimately I want to get to a really critical question. If you were a victim of these cryptocurrency exchanges, if you lost your money, Tom will walk us through a little bit about what retribution you can have. So stay with us when we talk to former state representative, former commissioner, former Mr. Everything in the banking world, Tom Grady. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us. If you went out to your local website this morning to read the news, I am sure on that homepage was a story about a banking collapse, what the Fed is doing about it, the Federal Reserve Bank is doing about it, how can they combat this, and you'll also likely see stories about cryptocurrency. We're going to talk a little bit about these subjects, but first, let's welcome our guest. Tom, thanks for being with us. Now, you've held a lot of titles: representative, executive director, commissioner. Just Tom?
Tom works.
Okay. Before we get into the subject matter, tell a little bit about your background, because I want our audience to understand you got this.
Well, you've already given a preview, but I've worked in the financial industry for over 40 years as a lawyer representing clients with disputes in the financial industry, and as a regulator, as the commissioner of the Office of Financial Regulation here in Florida, down the street in Tallahassee. I had some responsibility for financial and consumer protection-oriented legislation when I was in the House of Representatives, as well as sponsoring a bill that created the differential accountability for our schools, which I later ended up having to implement. So that's an unusual thing.
That's
typically
cool.
When you legislate, you don't end up being subject to whatever
like
law it is.
You throw the grenade under the door and you walk away. You got to go back
bet.
into the room with the grenade.
I had to eat my own cooking, as I have said before. So, but primarily, when I'm not in a volunteer capacity, I work in the financial industry.
And I just learned this. I thought you were commissioner of the Office of Financial Regulation. I thought that meant you were one of the board members. No, you were the chief executive of that agency.
The director of the agency. The executive director called the commissioner.
And you're overseeing banks.
We had within our jurisdiction, and still the same today, banks. There's a division of banking, there's a division of finance, which includes money services businesses and money transmitters, which coincidentally is the license most crypto companies obtain. They get a money transmission license, which is what Western Union has them. Okay. Payday lenders have them, check cashers have them. But crypto, sorry to get ahead of you a little bit, but the cryptocurrency exchanges obtain these money transmission licenses and then tout themselves as fully licensed and fully registered, and that's a very small part of the story, but I don't want to get ahead of you.
Well, let's go right to it. So crypto for dummies. What is crypto? So I never invested because I don't invest in things I don't understand, and because when I invest in things that I do understand, I usually lose money, right? So it would only get worse if I didn't understand it. Give me the basics for dummies, cryptocurrency.
The real basic is there's something called a blockchain, and a blockchain, think of it as an Excel spreadsheet. It's a digital ledger. It's an accounting ledger. That's it. It's a fancy, fancy ledger. So you've got this spreadsheet, and on the spreadsheet, you can digitally create things. And one of the things that you can create is a token or a coin. And people have created tens of thousands of these things. We only hear daily of Bitcoin, maybe Ether, Ethereum, maybe Dogecoin, because that was created as a joke and ended up becoming something theoretically of value. But in its essence, it is a blockchain where people who are mining or otherwise proving they have a stake in the outcome are able to create out of thin air something that others think has value. I happen to think it has no value.
You know, it's interesting because currency in and of itself is sort of, I remember reading an article, currency itself is kind of a fraud. I have $1, well, let's use a better math. I have $5 and I walk in to buy a cup of coffee. And they accept that. If that acceptance collapsed, well, and when you see this happen when governments collapse, whether it was Sicily in the 1800s or Brazil or Venezuela, that $5, somebody says, no, that was yesterday, today, yeah, I need 10. Or tomorrow I need 20. Or in some cases I need 1,000 because that currency fluctuates. But you were explaining to me the other day that, like today in our modern economy, the currency fluctuates, but not by that much. It might, if it goes 1 or 2, 3, 4% a day or a week, it's not that much. But crypto is very different in that because it's not backed by the full faith of a government and doesn't have, I guess, real assets behind it, it can go from 0 to 1,000 and back to 0 overnight.
Generally speaking, it's backed by nothing. There are some crypto, and I don't even like the term currency, because let me back up and say crypto is not a currency. In order to be a currency, it has to be a store of value. You've given some examples of other countries outside of the US where their currencies are very poor stores of value. If you can't, like you said, if you can't count on, if you're selling especially, if you can't count on $5 being worth $5 by the time you put it in the bank, you have to do something different. You have to barter, you have to charge more money, you have to take that into consideration. We are excited in this country in a very, very sad way about inflation that has been resurgent this year as a result of Biden's economic policies. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% inflation. Think about that on an annual basis and what it does to your budget. Now think about so-called cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies every single day vary in value by 5, 6, 10, 20, 25%. So you could go in and let's say you're negotiating for a car and it's a $40,000 car and you want to pay in crypto. You sign a contract and by the time all the paperwork is done and you do the finance and insurance, and you meet with the warranty people and you buy all that extra stuff that you really shouldn't be buying anyway.
The undercoating.
Crypto's now worth $30,000 or $50,000.
Or nothing.
So it's not a currency. It's a myth.
So explain to me how this is different from when I Venmo you money. Because when I first started reading about crypto, I was like, oh, well, we're headed that way because, you know, I don't see my paycheck. I used to get paid in cash when I was a waiter back in the 80s, and then I started getting a check, and that check went in the bank, and it was mythical. And now I don't even see my check. I just see a number pop up on my screen, and I'm like, wait a second. But how is that different than crypto, which is this digital currency that I could say, hey, I want to buy a hat, I want to use my crypto, and I just exchange numbers, right? Because that's all my bank account is, numbers. I don't even see bills anymore, right? They all come and go through this online spreadsheet.
But the common denominator is that unit of exchange. When you send Venmo, you're sending US dollars, you're sending fiat currency. It may be depreciating in value over time. We've seen it in our lifetime. It will continue to depreciate. That's due to bad policies in Washington. But it's still backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, and everybody knows what it is, and everybody accepts it as legal tender. Okay. If you're doing the transaction on Venmo, it's US dollars, fiat currency.
So that's the basis underlying it?
Correct. And if you're doing a transaction with some kind of a crypto, don't like the word currency, but cryptocurrency, pretending that it's a currency, maybe you're dealing with Bitcoin, maybe you're dealing with Ethereum, maybe you're dealing with Dogecoin, maybe you're dealing with one of thousands of other tokens.
I want to leave it there for a second. I want to come back and talk about how this has impacted banking and then what people can do about it. Thanks, Tom. We'll be right back and talk more about currency when we get back.